The Reformation in England. In early times, the King of England was the head of the church as well as of the nation. In those days, popes were considered to be money-minded, so the papal rule was very bad in those days. So, opposing money-minded popes, many groups of people emerged to abolish papal rule, which is evil. First one, John Wycliffe. Second one, Oxford Reformers. Third one, Martin Luther King. And finally, we have sack of Rome. We are going to see it one by one in detail. Initially, it was John Wycliffe who attacked the Pope and the papal court. He was a reformer. He understood that the evils of the church were due to the wealth of the church. His followers were called lollards, but they were persecuted and the evils and the abuses of the church continued. Second comes Oxford Reformers. Oxford Reformers met at university, made researches into Greek New Testament. They contrasted the state of church and its present condition. Through education, they wanted to bring reform. So, Oxford Reformers like Erasmus, Colet and Lilly laid the foundation for the Reformation of the Church of England. Then, Martin Luther King's role in 1517. People paid money to escape from the penalties of the sin. Martin Luther King proclaimed that only through repentance and faith in God, pardon for sin can be obtained. So, he nailed on the church door at Wittenberg a paper containing 95 statements. This German Reformation is the prelude to Reformation in England. So, we have understood who are the persons who opposed the evils and abuses of the church. Remember, it is John Wycliffe, then Oxford Reformers, and third one Martin Luther King. Now we are going to see the sack of Rome. In 1527, the holy city of Rome was sacked by Charles V, Emperor of Germany, King of Spain. Church was looted, nuns were raped, Pope and cardinals were besieged. As the court of Rome was ill-ruled, people felt that it was the judgment of God. So this incident was called the sack of Rome. Now we are going to see Henry VIII's reign. After the death of Henry VII and his elder brother Arthur, Henry VIII succeeded to the throne, marrying Arthur's wife Catherine of Aragon. Pope Julius II granted him permission to marry this widow. He encouraged to burn lollards, that is, Henry VIII encouraged to burn lollards, and he wrote a book, Defense of the Seven Sacraments, against Luther. So Pope gave him the title Defender of the Faith. Henry VIII and Catherine begot many children, but only one girl survived, that is Princess Mary. No woman had ever sat on the throne of England in those days. So he wished to marry Anne Boleyn. So he asked Pope Clement VII to declare this marriage with Catherine as null and void. But Pope hesitates because after the sack of Rome, Pope is in the control of Charles V, who was Catherine's nephew and her protector. Just because he didn't give permission to marry Anne Boleyn, he decided to abolish papal rule. That's what we are going to see now. Henry VIII wishes to marry Anne Boleyn, but the Pope refuses to give him the permission. So, to recover royal authority over his subjects, Henry VIII called the Parliament to function for 7 years in 1529. It is called Reformation Parliament because it destroyed the authority of Pope in England. After establishing Reformation Parliament, Henry VIII passed 3 acts: Act of Annats, Act of Appeals, and Act of Supremacy. Finally, he dissolved the monasteries. Let us see those acts in general. In 1532, an Act of Annats was passed forbidding bishops to pay the annats to the Pope, but to the king in future. In 1533, an Act of Appeals was passed. The court of Rome forbid the appeals can be received from England. Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop, announced Henry's wife Catherine not lawful wife. So Anne Boleyn occupied her place. So Henry VIII succeeded in his efforts to marry Anne Boleyn. And finally, in the year 1534, the Act of Supremacy was passed. The king was declared the supreme head of the Church of England. So papal rule is destroyed. The Church of England is separated from the Church of Rome. In the Church of England, king is the new head, not the pope. Now, dissolution of monasteries. To eradicate the power of pope completely, Henry VIII decided to abolish or dissolve monasteries. There were hundreds of monasteries in England. They were the centers of religion and learning. Monks produced books patiently. Children learnt in monastic schools. Travelers were given shelter and the sick people were tended. The Pope of Rome is governing these monasteries. Henry VIII understood these monasteries should be dissolved so that his act of supremacy can be complete. So, small monasteries were moved to large monasteries. His minister Thomas Cromwell gave false reports about monks as idle and gluttonous, committing sins. So that made the king continue further. Cromwell's agents persuaded to yield the greater monasteries to the king with promise of generous treatment like giving pension. 3 abbots only were against the king, so they were put to death. This is how the monastic property passed to the crown. Finally, we are going to see the end of Henry VIII's reign. After the dissolution of monasteries in 1538, the Bible in English was published. A copy of it is sent to all the churches in England. In 1539, 6 articles of the Catholic doctrine was announced. It imposed severe punishment if not accepted. To provide the payment for the priests, some lands were given to the church. The duty of the chantry was to say a mass every day for the souls of those founders of chantry. Henry VIII dissolved those chantries also, purely for royal greed. King confiscated the part of glitz also. For religious purposes only, glitz used part of craftsman's money. He confiscated that wealth also, so his character deteriorated in the end of his reign. After his death, his third wife's son Edward ascended the throne. Now let us see Edward VI's reign. Edward was a 9-year-old boy when he ascended the throne. One council was formed. It repealed 6 article statutes. Priests were allowed to marry. Protestant preachers from the continent reached England to instruct Protestant principles. After his reign, Mary began his reign. She wished to restore Catholic reign and the papal rule. Protestant preachers were exiled. 6 articles were restored. Act of supremacy was repealed. Monasteries restored to the throne. Married priests were ordered to separate from their wives. But Mary could not destroy Protestantism in England.